Weekly spread inspiration is always in demand, so today we're looking through every weekly layout that I've ever used. Note that I say used, not set up, so this video will not be including layouts that I've set up in other people's journals, or those set up for just idea videos. And because we're looking at weeklies, things like this layout from my very first bullet journal won't be included. Only layouts that had some kind of structure that I set up for the week, rather than just daily logs and filled in spaces. We're going to be looking at a lot, so make sure to screenshot the ones you like as we go through. But first we have my first weekly spread from back in 2016. You can see that I started my bullet journaling journey in November of 2016. And you can see this one has multiple parts to it. So we have a space for each day of the week on the left-hand page, including some decorative headers for each of the weekdays, and then spaces to write out mainly my events. I did also include some additional information, like little bits and pieces that were happening from the day, but on the other side we had a mini calendar with the week that we were currently in highlighted, a space of things that I wanted to do that week, a space for a 30-day declutter challenge that I was partaking in, so the prompt for each of the days of the week, and a space for a brain dump down the bottom. As we go through, I do encourage you to look at the layout with kind of a how could I tweak this lens. So for instance, if you don't really need a mini calendar space, what could you replace this with that would be more useful for you? If you're not doing a 30-day declutter challenge, are you doing a different challenge that you could put in here? Is this something like a priorities section for you, or just notes? All of the different bits and pieces can be swapped out for things that make more sense for you. My next weekly layout took much of a similar format, so spaces for each of the days of the week, the to-do list, the calendar, the challenge. You can see this challenge space became a little bit smaller because I decided to change up the challenge that I was tracking. And instead of a brain dump space, I wrote myself a list ideas list, or effectively collections that I might want to make in my journal. Nowadays, I would typically set this up as a separate list on a separate page rather than on my weekly layouts, but I was just getting used to how I wanted to use my bullet journal, so I put it on my weekly instead. When it came to the end of November, I wanted to have all of the days of November in my November section. So this weekly only actually has 3 days. You can see I just took the page, divided it into 3 equal sections, gave each of them a header, and then listed out the things I wanted to do, events, anything else. I kept a similar style for the next part of that week, so again wanting all of the days of December actually in the December pages, so just divided the page into 3, but had Saturday and Sunday together in this bottom section. When it comes to setting up your weeklies, it's always good to consider, are there any days that you might want to combine because you either kind of treat them as the same day and do the tasks that you have for that section of time on either of the days? Or do you very much want to have them separate and keep each of those distinct? Nowadays, I do prefer to have my weekends split, but again, I was just finding out what I liked. Our next weekly is a little bit different in that we had a space for each day of the week at the top with the weekend combined, and then the bottom sections were effectively split into thirds, so 1, 2, 3, but these 2 spaces were combined, and then same idea on this side. 1, 2, 3 columns, but these 2 columns were combined together. In the middle section, you can see I have some trackers, a mini calendar, some little affirmations, and a memory. And then on the outsides, I had some lists. So things to do and things that I hoped to do during the holiday period. For these weeklies, I didn't feel the need to have a full spread for each of the weeks individually because there wasn't really that much that I needed to keep track of. Instead, what I opted to do was have 1-page weeklies that were mirrored. So you can see we have the same sections on each of them. It's just that on this side, they're one way, and on the other side, they're flipped. So for both, we had a section for each day of the week, a to-do list, a mini calendar with the current week highlighted, a space to track my miracle morning, or effectively a little habit tracker, a space for my challenge that I was tracking, and a little kind of exercise log. Again, like I said before, what I'm really trying to highlight here is the kind of layout in general, not necessarily the specific spaces or how I've used them specifically. If you're not doing the miracle morning, maybe this could be a water intake tracker, or if you don't really need a to-do list, maybe this could be for a meal log, something like that. This weekly was quite a bit different in that it was only the top half of this one page, and this is effectively my first shot at doing the Alistair method. though I didn't necessarily know at the time that that's what it was called. If you wanted to know more about the Alastair method, I do have a separate video on that one. But effectively, we just have the initial for each of the days of the week to make columns to check off each of the tasks that I write in this space here. Welcome to 2017, and for this layout I kind of went back to a similar style to what we had before, so space for each day of the week, but on this page I didn't divvy it up into different sections. We just had one large page for a to-do list. This weekly was interesting because I was actually away for the majority of this week, so I didn't see much point in setting up a kind of fully structured weekly. We just had a space at the top here to record what was happening on each of the days, and then a to-do list. This page was left over, so I ended up filling it in with some flat meeting notes and a little washing schedule, but the left-hand page in particular was what I would consider my weekly log. Another style that's a little similar to something we saw before, so with a space at the top of the page for each of the days of the week and the weekend combined, but then the bottom section here was a little bit different. So we had the mini calendar with the current week highlighted, a space to talk about what was happening next week so I could keep it in mind, and then underneath this we had my task list. This side was for things that didn't need to be done on specific days, whereas these ones I wanted to record when they were happening. So you can see I've utilized the Alastair method again, just underneath the mini calendar. So these all got done on the Monday, these ones on the Tuesday, etc. I wanted to experiment and try something new with this weekly setup, so you can see each of the days of the week is housed in a triangular section. We then have a space for the week's events on the diagonal here, and then a before next week and a notes space over here. Not necessarily a layout that I would probably use again, just because it's a little bit complicated for me now, but it was fun to try something different. One of the things I quite like about looking back through my old journals is just considering how much I have grown, I guess, in my journaling practice, because this is not a very pretty weekly. But you can see I divided the spread into 4 main sections and then split this last box so we have Saturday and Sunday separate, just putting a header in each for the day of the month and then a space for my task list and my events underneath that. Going back to something a little bit more familiar, so we have the days of the week section on this side and then the other section on this side. So we had a to-do list, a chores tracker, what I was calling a horizon section, which is effectively things that were coming up, and then my school timetable so I knew where I needed to be when, because this was the start of the new school year. As we go further into this journal, you'll see that this type of layout was actually quite a favorite of mine. The stuff on this side tended to change, but this section I found quite useful, so I kept it for quite a while. This is an example of that, but one with my first Dutch door. So Dutch doors can be made by cutting away the page, but they can also be made by folding the page. So you can see this washi tape down the middle here was so that I could put a fold into the page, so I could see this underneath section when I folded this part over. This was very much my favorite weekly for a very long time. So just going through it, we have space for each of the days of the week, and then this middle section, or this middle page, was left open so that I could fill it with daily logging. So I'd do my daily log for the Monday, and then once the day was over, put in a highlighted line for my next header for the next day, and so on and so forth. When it came to the back page, this has a tendency to change depending on what was going on in the week. So for this one, I used it for a to-do list for things that didn't necessarily need to be done on any specific day, and then a little chore tracker and a little horizon section. So in terms of this layout in particular, we used it for this week. We used it for this week, though I accidentally put the header at the bottom rather than the top because I didn't actually leave enough space for it. You can see the back section I had a timetable, which I didn't have on the last one. I used it again for this week, but rather than this part being a Dutch door, because I didn't actually end up using the back side of it at all, I just put the next weekly over here. So for this weekly, we had the header in the middle of the page, a little bit randomly. We had my school timetable, my daily logging section down the side, a space for this week's tasks, and then the space at the top here was for each of the days of the week in terms of events, a space to note out what chore I was on that week, and a space to note what work I needed to do. Here with a similar layout again, and on this one I didn't use the Dutch door, I ended up doing a doodle, because this was the day that I did Shave for a Cure. Similar layout again, but I decided to make the entire side of this page just be a things I need to do list, again using the Alastair method. But on this iteration, I made this page a full timetable for school, and then use the other side to do my daily logging and my this week task list with my Alistair method. So effectively a weekly layout that had 2 full spreads dedicated to it. I liked that layout enough to use it twice. Let's just ignore the extent of the ghosting in the LT 1917. But for the next weekly, I went back to just having them on 1 spread. So space for each day of the week, my daily logging, and my this week section. By this point I was getting a little bit tired of that layout, so I was wanting to experiment with some different things. So this was my first Dutch door layout where I actually cut away the page. You can see I cut away the top section of this middle page. So the weekly itself is structured to have the header at the top, a large blank space that really could be used for something, maybe a task list or notes or a tracker. But then down the bottom on the actual Dutch doors, we have each of those split in half, and then a space for Monday through Thursday, and then Friday through Sunday, and a little projects list. For this week I went with something a little bit more familiar, though with not so attractive writing, but it's fine. Again, it's just nice to see how far I've come. And for this weekly I wanted something completely different, so we split each of the pages into thirds, horizontally, and then this last one I split in half, so I had a space for both Saturday and Sunday. It's nice to see that my brush lettering has gotten better, even if I don't really think that I'm all that good at it. I used to be much worse. This weekly was in a style we've already seen. I really wish I used a ruler for these because it does look messy. Towards the end of this journal, I was really just not feeling it anymore, so I got a little bit lazy with my setups. I did at least give myself a little reference down the bottom here to say which pen color I used, which was good if I wanted to use it again as the week progressed. For this weekly, I had a space for each of the days of the week, but again, I was trying to keep all of the days for 1 month in that month. So rather than set up another spread for 3 days, I just decided to include them on here as well. So the daily boxes and then a task list. As noted, this was my first bullet journal, and I did certainly find some layouts that worked quite well for me and used them to death, but I am very much the kind of person who likes to try new things, who likes to experiment with my layouts and find other things that might work for me, mainly so that then my layouts don't get stale. And that's very much what was happening towards the end of this notebook. I was getting kind of bored with my layouts. I did branch out and try a couple of other things, but by the end of it, I was really just ready to move into something else. My second bullet journal was still in an LT 1917, so we still have some ghosting, but on this one we had a completely different layout compared to what I usually was using. So we have a space for each of the days of the week, or at least the 4 that were actually in this month, a mini calendar, some decoration, a top 5 or priority list, a space for a quote, and then this page here was for my daily logging. So I didn't separate it out into each of the days, I just used the space I needed and then put in the header for the next day. This weekly is another one that has 2 spreads, so we've got this spread here, and then on the next spread I did my daily logging, so we'll focus on this one instead. We had my schedule for the week, so what was happening in terms of all-day events, and then at school events or middle of the day if it was the weekend, and then what was happening in the evening. And then on the left-hand side here, the sections we had were the header, the calendar, a steps tracker, a sleep tracker, my top tasks for the week, my weekly meals, a notes section, and a coming up section. I quite like how modular this one was. I liked these little trackers, I thought they were quite cute, and the different sections. Also putting the little gradient in each of the headers was quite pretty. Quite a step up compared to where we left our last journal. I did a similar thing again for the next week with some slight variation in the sections I was using, but I didn't actually fill out my steps and sleep tracker in this one, and this box here didn't end up getting used. Could have been for notes, could have been for tasks, or anything like that. This is the event section though, so full day, at school or middle of day, and then evening. Followed of course by the daily logs. Because those trackers hadn't worked for me, I decided to change it up a little bit here, so still had the schedule for the week, but then on this left-hand side we had a more thorough meal plan, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then a top tasks section. And then on the next spread we of course have the daily logs. For this one I have a meal plan and a meal log. So the idea was going to be that I tick off if I did eat the meal and not write something here. But I guess on this day I ate the loaded wedges and went to Sushi Train, so We had the schedule, but then when it came to the daily logs, rather than just doing it one after the other, I actually sectioned out a space for each of the days of the week, and also a general task space. So these were tasks that didn't have a specific day they needed to be done on, they just, in theory, had to be done during that week. Or at least I wanted to work on them. For our next weekly, I was obviously craving some nostalgia, so I had a space for each day of the week, but I did it a little bit differently in that I had Saturday and Sunday together, probably in part because I had gone away at this point, so I didn't need a space for each of them separately. And then on the right hand side here, we just have a space for each day of the week in terms of to-dos, rather than events. This was a weekly layout that I quite liked, so I had the schedule on the right hand side here, but then on the left hand side it was mainly about trackers. So we have the mini calendar, we have a habit tracker, so all the habits written out along here and the days of the week down the side. We have a meal tracker where we have the meals list and then I tick off when we ate it, kind of like an Alistair method. And then this little tracker at the bottom was for Duolingo, I think, and Duolingo points. So we have the grey line to indicate, I think, hoped for progress, and then the black line to indicate what I actually got done. As per the last ones, these were paired with some daily logs, and those daily logs were in pre-sectioned out spaces, so one for each day of the week, and a note space. I tried a similar thing for the next week, but rather than using a line graph, I went with a bar graph. You can see I didn't have quite as much success in terms of my habits or my Duolingo, but flipping on over, I again accompanied this with some daily logging spaces. But for this one, the weekend was shared and the notes section was larger. For our next one, I decided to change things up a bit and use a folded Dutch door, just with a much smaller piece of washi tape compared to previous layouts. But I effectively had all the same sections, just in different places. So the daily logs were now on this middle section, along with the notes. The event schedule was on this right-hand back page, and then on the left-hand side we had the habit tracker, some things that needed to get done next week or that were happening next week, and I removed the Duolingo tracker, because I guess it wasn't working. This weekly was a little bit strange in that it started on the right-hand page of a spread. Typically, if I have a one-page weekly, I'll usually have two of them side by side, so a little peculiar. Though technically this isn't a one-page weekly because we've got this one page here, but then flipping over we have those daily log sections. Another part that's a little bit strange is that it also starts on a Saturday and goes through to a Friday. I mean, technically speaking, you don't have to start your weeklies on a Sunday or a Monday. You can start them on whichever day of the week works for you. Just from my typical schedule, starting on a Saturday is a little odd. For this one though, you can see we have two halves here, so a half that has my meal plan and my events, and then another half that has my school schedule. As shown, we then have the daily logs with the weekend shared, but our next weekly log is one we haven't seen yet, and this one has a space for each of the weekdays being larger columns. We have Saturday and Sunday down the side, but still with their own separate spaces, a mini calendar, and then a header along the bottom here. I guess that would kind of make it a footer. I don't know. The title of the page on the bottom. I very much find that when I'm doing column layouts like this or vertical weeklies, I do prefer to only have 3 columns per page rather than trying to fit 4. If I try and do 4, oftentimes there's not enough space for me to write in my tasks. For our next weekly, this one has a mini calendar, a space for a quote, a note section, and an event section with space for each of the days of the week. And then the right hand page here has that Alistair method checklist. This next one though has been one of my favorites, and I have used this one a couple of times over. Again, we still have the calendar and the space for each of the days of the week in terms of events, but then the rest of the space is kind of sectioned off into 9 squares. So we have 3 on this half of the left-hand page, and then 6 on this right-hand page. Of those 9, 7 of them are for the days of the week, and then the other 2 are for whatever you want. In this iteration, I used a sticker as kind of a quote, and then a little note space down the bottom here. Certainly one of my favorite weekly layouts. To get these header boxes looking nice and crisp, I used washi tape on the page to mask the page from the color, and then colored in between 2 strips of washi, so coloring in the gap. You can see I used this layout again for the next week, and I think of the 2, this one versus this one, the orange one is probably more my favorite. I just think it turned out looking really good. I used that layout again in October, but prior to this one, I actually had 2 one-page weeklies. So both of these pages were divided in half, so half of them was a to-do list, and the other half had my events and mini calendar sections. So 1 week here, and the following week here. In October, we also had the first iteration of my kind of schedule-based weekly spread. So you can see each of the columns here is for the weekdays. Then we have the side here for Saturday, Sunday, and next week. There's a lot of different sections here, so working from left to right. This one was Labor Day, so I didn't need to have it scheduled out in terms of the blocks of time for my school schedule. So instead I had a little space for Monday itself, a space for my dinners for the week, and then a space for a mini calendar with the current week highlighted. You can also see that each of the days has a little tracker for my water intake. When it comes to Tuesday through to Friday, each of these has 6 spaces here for my school schedule, and then at the bottom we have my notes list, or things that I need to get done, task list. So the same for each of those, and then Saturday and Sunday just have their little water tracker and then a little task list, and the next week section is just a little list for things that were coming up. This layout worked really well for me because I really wanted to keep track of what I was doing in each of my school periods. So I did end up using it again for the week after that, though this time moving that dinner section and the little calendar to the Tuesday because it was athletics day, so I didn't need to have all of the scheduled out periods. And I used a similar version of it for the next week, but I flipped it so that then instead of it going vertical, it went horizontal. So we have Monday going across, Tuesday going across, so on and so forth, Saturday and Sunday down the bottom here, the meal plan and the calendar, and each of those has their little water tracker. Sadly, I accidentally spilt some water on my journal, so you can see a little bit of bleeding there, which is a bit unfortunate. But comparing this layout to the vertical version was my personal preference. I prefer vertical layouts to horizontal, but it was still cool to try it in a different way. So because I preferred the vertical, I went back to it for the week following, just with a slight change up of where things were, and I did a similar thing for the week after that as well. Though you can see for both of these, I actually wrote along the side that these were periods 1 through 6 and a task section. Whereas on the previous iterations, I just had those extra spaces in the middle of the page and didn't actually use them. I obviously quite liked this layout because I used it for quite a while, it seems. But as we were coming up to the end of the school term, I did need to find a new weekly because there's not much point in having a weekly layout that is very much structured around your school timetable when you're not at school. This weekly was something a little bit different for me, so we have it a little bit more free form with things kind of just placed around the page and then the extra space filled in with decoration. But because I did place all of these headers at the start of the week before writing out my task lists, I do still consider this to be a weekly rather than a kind of build as you go daily. On this one though, we have the event section, spaces for each of the days of the week and the weekend shared, a notes section, and a water intake tracker. Everything else is just filled with decoration, whether that be paint or washi tape or doodling or the header. This weekly was interesting in that it just has a space for each of the days of the week, but I never actually specified which days they were. The only reason I actually know is because this one says Bujo Wednesday, so that was Wednesday. Fairly simple though, we just have 2 columns for my tasks to get written in, and 7 sections moving down the page, 1 for each day of the week. The events were coloured in red, while the tasks were just in white, and my meal plan had a little knife and fork icon. These next weekly layouts are 1-page weeklies again, and technically speaking, they're actually both fairly similar, they're just done in slightly different ways. So for each of them, on the left hand side, we have a space for each day of the week. It's just that the spacing on these is slightly different. So each of them take up 3 dot grid boxes down, but this one is right next to each other, whereas this one has a space in between. Next to that, on the right hand side though, we then have my to-do list. Both have a header, but because this one is spaced out, we don't have as much space at the bottom for anything, whereas this one being a little tighter means that we have a space for a quote. So very similar in terms of their structure, but they look very different. My second bullet journal finished at the end of December, which meant that I had the very exciting task of setting up a new bullet journal for the new year. Previously, the journal before this one was set up in November, so it only actually had 2 months in it before we got to January, so starting a new journal seemed a little silly. But that meant that this bullet journal was the first one that I actually set up with a new year, which was very exciting. Starting in January meant that I was on holidays, so I didn't have quite as much to record, so our first ones are 1-page weeklies. This 1-page weekly had a space for each day of the week, though no dividing lines between them, a space for my meals, for dinners in particular, and then a space for things to get done or my task list. This page here actually wasn't part of the weekly. This was just things that I wanted to do before school went back. So rather than being things that I specifically wanted to do in this week, they were just things that I wanted to do over the next couple of weeks. Our next ones are also one-page weeklies, so 1 week and another. And you see, again, we have the space for each of the days of the week in terms of events, but the meal plan was much bigger because I expanded it to include breakfasts and lunches as well. Here we had the task list and also a little space for some extra notes of things that needed to be done. You can see that this one has similar sections as well, just we're kind of moving them around the page. So we have each of the days of the week. The meal plan, rather than being down the bottom, is now in the top right. And then the to-do list was in 2 separate columns at the bottom of the page here. So effectively the same stuff between both of them, just the spacing is a little different and the placing is a little different. Getting back to school though means more space needed for all of the things that I had to get done. So on this one we have a much larger section for my tasks. You can see it's 2 full columns and then the little bit down here. The top section here though is my meal plan, and then over here we have the events list separated into each of the days of the week. On this one I also included a little space to record next week's going-ons. Because we were then back into the throes of school and this layout had worked so well for me at the end of last year, I decided to give it a go again. Each of my 6 school periods had a little header so I could write which class it actually was and record the things that were going on or that I had to do in each of those periods. The bottom section, rather than just being for my tasks, also now had a meal plan for breakfast, lunch and dinner, and the same happened for Saturday and Sunday, so smaller task list and then a meal section. Smaller task list and then a meal section, and then this bottom corner we have the mini calendar and a next week section. I really liked how structured this was, though it didn't give me a lot of space to write down to-dos. So when it came to the next week, I decided to bring back my, what I like to consider an 8-box weekly. It's just that these 2 boxes got combined in one. So you take each of the pages, you divide them into 4 by doing a kind of vertical split and a horizontal split in the middle of each to give yourself 4 boxes per page. As said, these ones I combined though, so we have a space for each day of the week with the weekend combined, and then a larger to-do list section on the side. It's also worth noting that this was the year that I actually got onto YouTube, so a lot of the weekly layouts we're looking at from here on out actually have their own dedicated videos. We have a full playlist of those linked in the description box. This one though is based on having 3 columns, so column 1, 2, and 3, where those middle 2 columns on both of the pages are kind of combined. So we have 1 column being for the meal plan and the little mini calendar with the current week highlighted, and then on this side it's a to-do list, and then the middle 2 columns on both sides of the spread being for my daily task lists. So each of the weekdays separated out and then the weekend combined. I don't do this much anymore, but obviously I used to do it quite a bit. It's a little bit easier to find spacing that's even looking for 6 rather than for 7. This one is more of a vertical style weekly, so we have a space for each of the weekdays going down the page, and then the weekend in this last column here. Again, a lot easier to find spacing for 6 rather than 7. Each of these also included their meal log for the day, we had the mini calendar, and any of the extra space I filled in with stars or some lettering at the end of the week. Bringing back the Dutch doors, on this one we have a lower Dutch door here, with the top section being cut off so that regardless of which way that it is turned, I can see my events list for the week. So Monday through Friday, weekend shared. On the Dutch door sections, each of these was split in half, so you can see the divider for each of them. So we had a space for each of the days of the week. The weekend had this section here split out to Saturday, Sunday. And then this section over here was tasks for the week, a little tracker for things that I was keeping track of, and a meal plan. Getting a little adventurous and bringing back the triangles might be a little bit hard to see here because what I did was washi tape the page, which is the kind of like white strips, and then do a little bit of watercoloring to color in where I wanted the triangles to be for each of the days of the week. So we have Monday in this triangle, Tuesday in that triangle, Wednesday, Thursday, etc. Down the bottom we had some trackers, so sleep, water, my AM and PM routine, and how many parts of it I'd actually done for each of the days. And then the entire right-hand page was just dedicated to to-do lists, so 2 columns to use up. I expect that the bottom section here was filled in with decoration after the week was over so that it perfectly fit. This one was another vertical style, so you can see each of the columns for the days of the week, and Saturday, Sunday on the edge here. The triangle decoration was filled in after the week was over, effectively just as a way to fill space. As said, I really like it when my weeklies look very full, so filling in the extra space with decoration was a way to achieve that. The next weekly is another vertical style, though each of the columns was split in half so that I could effectively have 6 spaces per page. Though on this left-hand page, these 2 spaces were combined to make a to-do list for the week. This gave me 10 other spaces to play with though, so we have 7 of those for the days of the week, and then 3 for the tracking for my water, AM routine and PM routine. Each of the circles represented some aspect of the routine. So we had, 8 different segments in my AM routine and 8 different segments in my PM routine, and also 8 cups of water that I was attempting to drink, in theory. For this next weekly layout, we have 8 segments on the left-hand page here, so days of the week and 1 for notes. And then the right-hand side just has a task list separated into 2 columns. When it comes to weekly layouts, I find that it's made very much easier by knowing the different ways that you can divide your page up into different segments. For me, it's very much about segments that are the same size. I always prefer that. So in taking this left-hand page and splitting it down the middle and then into 4 per column. So 8 segments, 7 for the weekdays, an extra 1 for something else. For our next weekly, we had a return of the Dutch door, and rather than having daily logs or tasks broken down by which day I wanted them to be completed, I instead had a work task list and a personal task list. On one side of the Dutch door, we have the meal plan, separated by each day of the week, and on the other side, we have the events, also separated by weekday. You can see that not all of the space on this Dutch door layout got used. Technically speaking, I could have put the meal plan here and jimmied it so that the events fit in to one column and maybe this task list went over here. But it was cool to try having a separated task list, or task lists separated by theme rather than by time. Going back to something familiar but also a little bit different, we have the layout that is done based on my school structure or school timetable. The only difference here was that I didn't separate the weekend days out because I was going to Melbourne during that weekend, so I used this space for a packing list instead. This is part of the reason why I like to change up my weeklies. I like to structure them in a way that fits the week that I'm currently focused on. If I use the same weekly, week after week, 1, I'm gonna get bored, and 2, they don't necessarily fit that time of my life. This weekly is a little bit different to what we've seen before, but effectively we have a top half of the spread and a bottom half of the spread, and each of those halves is separated into 3 fairly equally sized sections. So this does mean that we have the middle sections going over the kind of spine area of the journal. You can see though the middle section has the initials for each of the days of the week, the weekend shared, and then we have Monday at the top, Tuesday at the bottom, Wednesday at the top, Thursday at the bottom, Friday at the top, and then the weekend at the bottom. Once I'd done all my task listing and note taking for the week, I then filled in any extra space with little decoration in terms of stars and circles and little crosses. Again, I like it when my weeklies look quite full, so decoration filling, quite an easy way to achieve that. For this weekly, we have it divided into 4 columns, so 2 for task lists, 1 for my meal plan, and 1 for my events. The event section is done based on there being a row, or like a section of rows for each of the days of the week. I just didn't put in any dividing lines. And that's one of the ways you can change up the weeklies. Either put the dividing lines in, or don't, change the color palette, change the decoration, lots of ways to make it your own. For this weekly layout, I tried to bring back the 2-page business, but as you can see, I didn't really use this side, so told myself to make things simpler the week after. That's not to say that this layout wouldn't work on another week where I was particularly busy, it just didn't work for this one. But as you can see, we have the boxes for each of the weekdays and a note space where the only note was to not do this. Whereas on this side, we had my timetable for school on the right-hand page, and then on the left-hand page, we had the mini calendar with the current week in a dark purple, a little space for events, space for my lunch plan and dinner plan, and the days that I ate those meals on, and then I brought back the Duolingo tracker, again as a bar graph type style rather than a line graph. In the next week, I certainly made things simpler by going to a one-page weekly. We had 2 sections here, and this one isn't quite in half. We have a slightly larger section for the events because I did this as an Alistair method. So we have initials for each of the days of the week, and then the list of all the happenings that were going on, and just highlighted which days they were happening. The other half of this, or smaller half, is a to-do list section, and this page here was just for decoration. This one was another weekly where I went and filled in space at the end of the week so that then it looked nice and full. But you can see we have the spread divided in half horizontally, so we have the top half and the bottom. The bottom half has sections for Monday through to Friday and Sunday, because above that is the Saturday. This space here is for the events, which is effectively just like 2 boxes merged together to make the event space. And then on the other side we have the header, mini calendar, which is expanded to say what week number it is, my dinners or meal plan for the week, and a quote, a very reasonable quote. Our next weekly is loosely based on the idea of splitting each of the pages in half vertically and then into thirds horizontally. It's just that those top thirds on both of the pages have either been fused together to make the event section or aren't quite in halves to make the header/calendar versus meal plan section. For our lower 2/3 though, each of these are in halves, so we have spaces for each day of the week, and we have a space for notes. For our next one-page weekly, I decided to just put everything in one running list. This included both tasks and events, though I did try and write out the events first, and this mainly worked, apart from the prepare for tomorrow task. It does seem that I had intended to make this a 2-page or full spread weekly and roll over onto the next page, but as I noted here, I didn't end up using it because I was moving. Similarly, this weekly didn't really get used because of the craziness that went with moving, so it kind of ended up being a 1-page weekly with space for events and a meal plan and a task list, but I didn't really finish it, so it's kind of hard to see what might have been going on. And then the next weekly we have features quite a lot of Dutch doors, which I decided to fold and stick rather than cut. But honestly, it probably would have made more sense to cut them because this got really bulky. What we have though is I would call it a mini calendar, but it's actually quite large. It takes up like half the page with the header, a space for my top tasks. On the very back, we had what was going to be a kind of running to-do list. And then on each of the little Dutch doors, we have the header, the space for the task list and events, a space to do some journaling if I wanted to, and then a place to write out my meal plan or meal log. So each of those looks fairly similar, really just depends on how much I wrote in terms of my tasks and events. And the weekend was shared, so 2 meal sections for that one. For this weekly log, we had the day-based sections on the left, and then a theme-based task list on the right. So school or work tasks and home tasks. And then on this side we had my school schedule and then other going-ons. And then down the bottom we had Saturday and Sunday in separate columns. After this journal though, I had had enough of the ghosting and was looking for something with paper that was a bit thicker, so I moved into my first Scribbles That Matter notebook. This weekly was a little bit interesting, so it was based on the idea of splitting each of the pages in 2/3, so 3 columns, and into 4 rows, so you effectively get a grid of boxes. In terms of what the boxes were used for, we effectively have it so that 3 boxes were used for each of the weekdays. So Monday and its 2 other boxes, Tuesday, it's 2 other boxes, Wednesday, it's 2 other boxes. For each of the weekdays, so Monday through Friday, one of the boxes was used for my school schedule, so I could see what was going on and what we were doing. One of them was just, the day specific box with other general events, and then the other one was used for a task list. When it came to the weekend, Saturday and Sunday had 2 task lists each, and then I also had some extra boxes for mini calendar, things that were coming up next week, and just some general thoughts about stuff that I might want to get. The next layout was a 1-page weekly where I again split the page into 3 columns. Our first column has the mini calendar and the event section, and then the next 2 columns were for to-dos, and I put in a quote to fill some space. This page over here wasn't actually part of the weekly, it was just things that I wanted to do in the holidays. This weekly was weirdly really popular online, which I would never use this anymore because there is nowhere near enough space to write things down. But as you can see, we've just got the page divided, so we have 7 boxes, 1 for each day of the week. A little bit fancy in that we have each of the labels for the weekdays on alternating sides as we run down. This weekly is one that highlights very much the idea of not having 4 columns, only having 3 when I set up my weeklies, because these were very hard to actually write things in. Obviously didn't have too much going on this week though, because we have a nice big decorative header and then very small task lists and some little icons to indicate what kind of weather we were having. When it came to August, this is one of those series of weeklies that very much highlight the idea of having the same sections but just moving them around. So for each of the weeklies, we have a little cloud that says what week it was in the term, a cloud that says what week it was for the year, a cloud for a little quote, the header, a timetable space, and little event section, and then spaces for each day of the week in varying sizes. So you can see we have all of those here, and then we also have all of them on the next week, though you can see things have moved around a bit and the event space has gotten a little bigger. I also had the addition of a notes space on this one too. On the next one, the notes space has been switched out for a general to-do list, and again, things have moved around a bit. We also have it so that the weekend is now together rather than being separate. And then when we got to the 4th iteration of this, you can see that things aren't quite as filled in because I was getting a little bit sick of using the same kind of stuff over and over. Like we said, I enjoy changing up my weeklies. For the 5th one, I did decide to change things up a bit so that we don't have each of the daily sections. I just have timed tasks versus to-dos. And the timed tasks, I indicated when they needed to be done by giving an initial for each day of the week. I even gave myself a little thought box. As much as I love this layout, I am so excited to have a different style lined up for next week. Would faux show use it again though. The one I was moving to was set up to mimic the one that was structured for my school timetable, though this week in particular we had the founders break and that's why it probably doesn't quite look like it. But each of the weeklies in this month again was effectively the same, except I changed the colours from a more pastel kind of palette to one that was a bit more vibrant. So spaces for each of the 6 periods, the to-do list, the weekend on the side, little notes section. But again, after using this as many times as I did, I was getting a little bit sick of it as well. If I was still a teacher though, I would certainly use this style of layout again. It was just nice having a dedicated space for each of my school periods, but not a space that was so big, and then also still having a place to write down other tasks and to-dos that I had to do that aren't necessarily class specific. This October was the first month that I used an iteration of what I'm gonna call a weekly layout, in the sense that it has pre-sectioned out places for me to write stuff and the like, but technically is kinda like daily logs. But you can see we have a series of Dutch doors here. We have a to-do list that was for the month rather than for the week, and the idea was that I could continue this on to this back side here as well, and I did a little bit. But each of these Dutch doors has space for 4 days of the week, or I guess 4 days of the month. So we have 1 through 4, and then 5 through to 8, and 9 through to 12. Each of these just had a little space to write down what I needed to do, or the events that were going on, and a space to complete the doodle challenge that I was working on. So I actually quite liked this. I liked how decorative it was. It was also kind of nice having all of the sections pre-sectioned out for the month so that I had spaces to write things down. I didn't have to have like a next week section on each of the weeklies that I would have set up, because I can just go write it on the day it's actually happening. The Dutch doors also meant that I could see my little weather panel down the side here, though from memory I didn't actually fill this in before the day. I filled it in after the day as more of a record of what did happen rather than what might happen. So a little bit different in terms of the setup here. It's not like a true weekly, it's more like pre-sectioned out dailies, but I still thought it was worth a mention because I did enjoy using it. Having really enjoyed the Dutch doors from October, I decided to do a bunch of Dutch door weeklies in this setup, but the structure of these was all fairly similar. So in terms of the middle panels, this is where we had our daily logs. But on the left-hand side, we have the event section, the weekly to-do section, a header and a mini calendar. And then on the back section, we had top things of the week in terms of like TV show, movie watched, book read, meal, music, social time, something I was loving in general, and I guess something I was writing. The report writing doesn't really sound like a top of the week, but that's fine. We had a little section for the week that was coming up, and we also had a reflection. In terms of each of the daily logs though, each of these had the header, which I did kind of in the same style for each of the days within that week. So little ribbons for this weekly, an intention space for my top 3 things that I wanted to do, a to-do list, successes of that day, challenges of that day, and the doodle section. You can see that this layout worked really well. I really enjoyed using this. I mean, of course, if you use the same thing over and over, if you're me, I did eventually get sick of it, but it did work quite well. So same layouts again, but this one has more days because it actually started on Monday. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You can see we're using little arrows for these headers. And then Saturday and Sunday were together on the back. They didn't have a very big task list. They only had the intentions so that I could fit both of those days on this back page here. So you can see I used this one quite well. When we get to the next week though, you can slowly start seeing me decrease the amount of use that things were getting just towards the end of the week here. But the layout itself for the weekly, I really liked. As usually happens, I can feel my motivated approach to each day decrease now that we have passed the month's halfway point. Need to work on finding some long-term solutions to this issue. I'm still looking for them past me. I'm still looking for them. Same again though, same dailies. Really loved them. Absolutely excellent. Didn't use them as much as I could have, but hey, absolutely didn't use this one. And this was going to be the reflection space, but I just stuck in my name card from a wedding that we went to. As you can see, road tripping and wedding was a top of the week. This was the final iteration of that weekly in November. You can see I didn't even end up sticking in the header. I did try and start the week off strong because I knew that having it so empty from the past week had been kind of a bummer. And rather than having a week in review at the end of this one, I had a month in review instead. And I know that this layout in particular was very popular on Instagram. So it's not necessarily something I would typically include in a weekly setup, but because this was the last week of the month, it made sense to do a month in review rather than just a weekly review. Typically when it comes to weekly setups, I go for perfect fit models. So not ones that have empty space that you fill in with decoration, and certainly not staggered boxes. But for this month, I was trying some different things, and this was a weekly that I found online and recreated. So we have a box for each of the weekdays and the weekend shared again, a currently section, a now and later section, which I guess was kind of like a things to do this week, maybe things to do next week kind of idea. It was an interesting layout, not necessarily for me, but it could be for you. This was another recreation, but as I mentioned before, I do prefer when I have 3 columns maximum for my vertical weeklies rather than 4. This one felt a lot tighter than I actually like to use, so wasn't necessarily for me, but was pretty cute. Again, I also don't like the feeling of the wasted space here. I like my weeklies to feel really full. So I could have gone and filled it in with more decorative elements, but that wouldn't have been true to the recreation that I was trying to do. Speaking of full weeklies, this one worked out very well. I really enjoyed this weekly. Even though we have 4 columns, it felt like I had more space because I took up the entire width of the page. For this one, we have Monday through to Monday because it was the last week of the year. And once I'd done my task list for the day and the day was over, I filled in the extra space with journaling. We also have a little tracker at the top here for some of the habits that I was hoping to build. I had really enjoyed using the Scribbles That Matter, so I did decide to use another one for my next notebook. The first weekly in this one is a little different to what we've seen before. You can see we have 2 columns per page, but this top section is split, so we have a row going the full way across for each day of the week in terms of events, intentions, or like my top 3 tasks, successes, and challenges. For instance, the challenge of being hungover AF. Down the bottom though, this was for the week as a whole. So my priorities for the week, my to-dos for the week, of which I only filled in a little bit, and then my notes for the week. These icons here were part of a doodle challenge I was doing, rather than like an icon to represent anything about the day, though you could use it for something like a weather forecast, or just take it out and have that row go all the way across. On this next one, the doodle challenge continues, though we've split each of the pages into 4, so a box for each of the days of the week, and then a to-do list for the week in general. Again, each of these has events, intentions, successes, and challenges. So less about tasks to do, which is more here and I suppose the intentions section, and more so about reflection. So what went well today, what was challenging about today, and then probably at the end of the day, setting my intentions for the next day. Our next weekly is another one that's a little bit different. So on the right hand side here, we do have a space for each day of the week, being to-do list section, event section, and my doodle challenge. But then on the left hand side, I instead have what my goal areas are and the action steps that I want to work on or take in that week. Down the bottom, I also have 3 little boxes, so top happenings from the week, things that I need to get done, and things that are coming up. This layout probably seems familiar by now, so it is based on that one that is structured like my school timetable, but instead of having the period numbers down the side, I've got the times of 9 through to 3, because this week was what we call week 0, so it's a teachers only week, so things are done time-based rather than period-based. So these 4 days in the middle, Tuesday through to Friday, they actually had the timed tasks, and then the stuff on the outside is the non-timed stuff. And again, I tucked my doodle challenge into the headers for each of the days of the week. For this weekly, I had 6 rows going down the page, so the weekend shared again, and each of these had a section for what my lessons were, what events were happening, and the tasks that I needed to do. Because the task list for each day was kind of small, I also needed another to-do list section, so 2 columns of stuff, mainly I think for school stuff and home stuff. This weekly kind of highlights to me my personal like of even-sized boxes, because as you can see, Tuesday through Sunday is evenly split, so half of the page each, whereas because Monday was next to the mini calendar, it is a bit wider. While this is something that 2019 Jess would do, it is not necessarily something that current Jess would do. On this side though, we again just have 2 columns for my to-dos for the week. Though this part here was actually a list of collection spreads that I wanted to make in my new long-term collections journal. This week was a little bit special because I was away on EOTC week or camp week, so I didn't have a lot of things to do in terms of, actually writing tasks out. So instead I had a kind of memories page and then just a list of tasks and to-dos for while I was there, and a little event section at the top, along with the mini calendar. The next week is similar to the first, but I obviously learnt from having that unequal spacing of the boxes, so we do have half of the page for each of these. I expanded that mini calendar by just writing out the week number as well, so it took up a little bit more width, and then our notes and to-dos on the right hand side here. Similar again for the next week, just moving things around a bit. So because the mini calendar is now no longer with the weekdays, I have a little note section to fill in that space, and the to-do lists are in 2 separate columns again, but with 2 separate headers because they're now split. This one was a nice, simple weekly, so we just have some side panel decoration, which makes our kind of usable space a little narrower. But of the space we had left, I just split it into 8 boxes and have a space for notes. Typically when I split things into 8 boxes, when, there are only 7 days of the week, I do usually use the last one for notes, or I'll use it for a general task list that isn't day specific. Of course, you can use it for whatever you want. You could put in a mini calendar, you could put in a little habit tracker, a meal plan. My go-to usually is notes or tasks though. This one I remember I did multiple lines around each of the boxes because one of my lines went a little bit cattywampus and I wanted to kind of disguise it. But for this one we have 6 boxes, so the weekend shared, and then this page on the right was just dedicated to a task list, but I only ended up using 1/2 of it. For the next week I decided to use a full spread of the Alistair method, so the initials of Monday through Sunday on the left hand of each of the pages, and then a full list of my to-dos, and I just check off which day those things got done. A box obviously means that I had scheduled it for then, and then the cross meant that it actually got done. So for instance, Year 8 moderation was scheduled for the Monday, I started it, I didn't complete it. April was another one of those months where I had a section for each day, but it kind of ended up being more like dailies than it did like a weekly. But you can see the general format is fairly similar. We've got the intentions, or like the top tasks for the day. We have the task list, 3 things that happened that was good, like successes of the day, and then my meal plan and water tracker at the bottom. And that was the same for each of those days, which you don't have to set it up for a full month like I did. You could just try it for a week, but obviously I decided to do all of the days at once, and this was in part because I was going away in April, so having them all set up just made things a little bit easier for me. Getting back into proper weeklies, and by that I mean 5-day weeklies because I've got Wednesday through to Sunday, and that's because Monday and Tuesday of this week were in April. But I do like setting up weeklies that have less than 7 days sometimes, or sometimes more, because it means you can try new things in terms of your layouts. So for this one, we have each of the pages split into the 5 rows, and then for each of these we have a little column on the side to indicate what day it is, a column for my doodle challenge and the name of the character that I was doodling, and then for the other spaces we have events. I believe we have school tasks, maybe personal tasks, and home tasks, I think. Didn't label it, so I'm not quite sure. For the next one, we have a combination of having a space for each day of the week, so a row that has the doodles on the side, it has a little task list for each of the days in particular, and then a running task list for the week using the Alistair method again, and some shiny washi tape. For this one, I made the doodle challenge boxes a little bit bigger, and you can see that I have 8 across the bottom here, despite there only being 7 days of the week. Because I like the idea of the even spacing, I decided just to do 2 characters from Hercules, just so I didn't have to try and either have like 3 on one side and 4 on the other, or I don't know, just leave a character out and only do 3 and 3. This just made it a little bit easier. But for the rest of the sections, we have 3 spaces at the top, so Monday through Friday and the weekend shared. And then the spaces in the middle here were just for checklists. And most of these seem to be school related, which makes sense. That's pretty much what most of my checklists were at this point in time. I used the same layout for the next week, again with 2 characters from The Princess and the Frog, just so I could have 4 characters and 4 characters rather than having to do weird spacing. Also the same with The Emperor's New Groove, so 2 characters from that too. Probably so that I had enough characters on the next spread in terms of filling all of my boxes. Because this one also has some double ups in that I have Wreck-It Ralph twice and I have Frozen twice. For this one though, you can see we've changed the layout, so we're going horizontal. We have columns for the days of the week, columns for the doodle challenge, columns for events, and then this is a note section, so it's just notes, and columns for tasks, or more notes. June was another one where I just had a space for each of the days of the month as a whole, so effectively half a page for each of them, and I put them all on Dutch doors so I could fold them, but it wasn't really super necessary. You can see we have Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, etc, etc. So just a full half page for each of the days. A little bit more akin to dailies than it is to weeklies. While I had been enjoying the scribbles that matter, when it came to my next journal, I'd actually been sent one. So for the next one, I used a Dingbat's notebook. And in this one in particular, I took on the challenge of weekly setup challenges. You'll see what I mean. Because I had gotten a little bit bored with my weekly plan with me videos, I wanted to do something a little bit different for each of them, so set up a list of little challenges that I could do for each of those weekly setups. As you can see, our first one is a 1-pen only weekly, and this layout actually ended up getting me in trouble at school because I was talking about how I wasn't enjoying my time at school. Like, I literally got called into the principal's office because I had this on my weekly saying that I wasn't feeling great about my time at school. Took a picture, posted it to Instagram, one of the students saw it, and yeah, got called into the office. Didn't feel so great. So just a cautionary tale about putting your planner out there on the internet. Remember that people can see it, and they won't necessarily interpret it the way that you might think. I don't know. Shrug. Anywho, the challenge for this weekly though was 1 pen, so all of this was done with 1 pen. It took a hot minute. I do actually quite like it. I really wanted to highlight the kind of decorative aspect of using just the 1 pen, so we have some kind of extra space, I guess you could say, around all of the boxes. But in general, we have the header, we have a space for each day of the week in terms of stuff for school and stuff for not school. We have things to do for each of my different life areas in terms of kind of like care for self in each of these categories, a little bit of journaling space, and then things to get done. This weekly challenge was washi tape only, so we have washi tape dividers, washi tape rainbow decoration, washi tape labels. In terms of the layout itself though, we have a space for each day of the week and the stuff that was going on there in terms of either events or things that I needed to get done, and then a running task list on this half of the right hand page, or effectively where the washi tape wasn't. I wasn't going to write out all of my tasks in washi tape. The next weekly challenge was a stickers only weekly. So I decided to separate this lower part of the page into 6 segments. So 3 of them had a decorative sticker and the other 3 were for lists for each day. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday shared. Not my favorite way to use stickers, but I think that the essence of the layout could be good. Like if these weren't actually stickers, or if they were stickers that were actually a little more cohesive, and if those stickers were cut down a little so that there was a bit more space to write in, that would be kind of nice. So I'm not necessarily against the layout, I just don't like this iteration of it so much. The challenge for this weekly was a 5-minute weekly, so trying to set it up as fast as possible effectively. But in terms of structure, we have 4 rows per page, giving us 8 spaces. 1 for notes, because that's what I like to do. And then you could kind of consider that each of these rows was separated into 3 segments as well. So 1 for the kind of decorative element to indicate which day of the week it is, 1 for the events and tasks, and 1 for notes. By reading the notes, it doesn't seem like this was a great week. The challenge for this week was to recreate an old weekly, so it is very much one we have seen before with the folded Dutch door and the timetable and the notes and to-dos. Kind of weirdly though, I was recreating this weekly, and the iteration that I was recreating in particular had been the week that my great aunt died. And then in this week, my great uncle died, like the one that used to be married to her. And I was just like, well, I'm not recreating this weekly again because it can't be trusted. I'm not that superstitious. It was just a weird coincidence. This weekly was a lot of fun because this was to use my non-preferred hand. So I drew everything in, like not wrote the tasks in, but drew everything in with my left hand. In terms of structure though, we have a top half and a bottom half for the left-hand page and 4 columns for each. Usually 4 columns I'm not so good with, but in the dingbats there's actually 2 extra columns of space, so it kind of worked okay here. So 7 for the days of the week and 1 for notes, and then this one was a to-do for the week. You know, given the fact that it was my non-preferred hand, it's not too bad. It's not great, but it's not too bad. This one was another weekly that got a lot of love on social media, but the challenge for this week was to use my least favorite colors, which is kind of like, I don't know, a very subdued meh brown. But at the top we have the space for each of the weekdays, the mini calendar, and then down the bottom we've got the Alistair method for the running task list. This was our highlighters only weekly challenge, but we have the row for each of the days of the week with events and to-dos in separate columns, and then a weekly to-do list on the right-hand page here. Our next challenge was a 1-page weekly, so this is effectively a condensed version of the last one. So we have our events on one side and then our tasks for the week. So we've just taken out the task list by day and squashed together events and weekly tasks. The challenge for this one was to do a weekly in my monthly theme, which is kind of much more akin to what I now currently do. You see we had a lot of stars and stuff like that because we were going with like a space galaxy-esque kind of theme with little rockets, stars, planets, all that kind of stuff. This one was another one that was very popular on social media, but isn't really a style that I would probably tend towards now because I've come to the conclusion that I don't really like horizontal weeklies for me, but we've got the horizontal section for each of the days of the week and their events, and then the to-do list over here, but it was done in a daily log format. So write out all the stuff for Monday, then put the header for Tuesday, write out all the stuff for Tuesday, then put the header for Wednesday, so on and so forth. This weekly was in celebration of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, or Māori Language Week, so each of the headers were done in Te Reo Māori. I did quite like this layout, I have used it again, but we have the mini calendar, my top 3 tasks of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then a weekly to-do list. Effectively based on the idea of having each page in halves, and then separating into thirds when you're going horizontally. This weekly didn't end up getting used, and I think it's because I was unwell, but I actually did really like the way it looked. This one was a time-blocked weekly, so blocked in my schedule in terms of school, things that were going on, and then I had a space at the bottom to write out my notes. It's just I wasn't well, so I didn't really end up using it, and I was still unwell come the weekend, so I didn't end up putting anything in there. Because it's the dingbats, I could have 4 columns and still comfortably fit things in, but I think this would be a little bit trickier to do in a way that I still had enough space if I was using, say, an Archer and Olive A5. This weekly was set up for me by Vogel, so he actually drew all of these in. I think he found some inspiration online and recreated it. I think we did like a look through on Pinterest. This is again one of the layouts that does have a video on the channel, and there's a playlist linked below with all of those videos. Very much different to what I would usually do, so we have kind of floating boxes, so 4 days here, 3 days here, and a little bit of decoration at the top. Of course, he went a little bit ham with the pen work, so we did end up with some bleed through. Attack of the one-page weeklies though, and we again have a section for each day of the week down the side. Despite saying that I'm not really all that big on horizontal layouts, that's mainly for my task lists. I like task lists to be vertical because I can write more in them, but when it comes to listing out my events for the week, I do like a little horizontal section. So splitting it in half, events, tasks. For this one though, we have split the page in half and then into quarters going down so that we can have a section for each day of the week and a note space. We've seen layouts similar to this one before, but again, you're changing things up by either putting outlines or not, doing different lettering styles, headers, colors, decorative bits, all of that jazz. For this weekly, we have a Dutch door, and the Dutch door is just done by cutting half the page away. By one view, we have a mini calendar, and then a space for Monday through to Friday. Then flipping over, we have Saturday and Sunday on the back. On this page, we have 3 columns for tick, so good things, cross, bad things, and arrow, meaning ways to improve or what I should try and do tomorrow, that kind of thing. And down the bottom we have general to-dos and notes. I quite like this layout. I would certainly use this again. One we've seen before, based on that idea of splitting the page into 4 boxes and then just combining these 2 together. So Monday through Friday, the weekend shared, and the to-do list on the side. A nice and easy weekly layout. This is the second iteration of the one that we saw before, just using different colors and with English headers. I'd really enjoyed keeping the weekly color palette the same as the monthly color palette, which is why all of these previous ones we've just looked at have been in pink and orange, because that's the colors I was using for the month. New month, new style of weeklies though. These are actually dailies, so moving on. This weekly spread is another that's based on having each of the pages split into halves. So our first column, or first half of the first page, has the calendar and the events. The second half has 4 days, as does the next half, or the next half of the next page. And then this last half is for a to-do list. This one in particular has 8 days of the week, because we have Monday through Sunday, but then also the first Sunday of the month, which I put on here as well. This weekly was kept super simple, so we just had Monday through Sunday written out on both of the pages, and then tasks and events header, and then I wrote down all of my tasks and the events. This one was a folded Dutch door that I ended up sticking down because I didn't have anything on the backhand of the page, but you can see we have days of the week and their events. This one spanned the entire of the page though, probably didn't need quite as much space. On our Dutch door we have my daily checklists, or dailies, and then on the back side here we have Christmas planning and things to do that week. This next one is quite special to me because it's like a different version of a Dutch door, and rather than having, like we had on the last one, the Dutch door be attached at the kind of middle of the page, because that's where pages are usually attached, on this one I folded the Dutch door down and stuck it to the page underneath. So the part that the Dutch door actually comes out of is the middle of the left-hand page. It's a similar style to what we had, but I kind of learned from the mistake of having a really wide section for the events list. So we have the events list on half of this left-hand page, then the Dutch door page stuck down on top of it. 3 days of the week here, 3 days of the week here, and another 3, so 9 days on this weekly, because the Monday and Tuesday felt silly to have on their own weekly. And then the entire back page here was for a to-do list. Quite like this layout though. I would certainly use it again for a month where Monday and Tuesday were the last 2 days of the month. While I did enjoy the dingbats, I didn't quite like so much the fact that the paper was ivory rather than white, and I'd started hearing a lot about a new to me company, which was Archer and Olive. Of course, now Archer and Olive is one of my favorite notebook brands, but anywho, let's have a look at the weeklies. For the weeklies in January, I had the same type of sections, but just in different spaces or with slightly different spacings. For instance, down the side here, we have Wednesday through Sunday and a next week segment because I wasn't including days that weren't part of January here. So we've got days of the week and next week. We have my Alistair method task list, trackers for water, steps, and mood, a leisure tracker, a note space, and then a little weekly review being successes, challenges, and improvements. On these weeklies, I also included a little tick box at the top so that I could check off when I'd migrated everything from this weekly, or when the weekly was effectively finished with. The second week was similar, just a little bit less washi tape, and a little bit more utilizing of the available space because we needed to have 7 days of the week on this one. So, days of the week, task list, trackers, reflection, leisure, notes, and those checkboxes. I quite liked this weekly. It was a good kind of overview of the week. For the next week, we had a similar thing, but we slightly moved things around. So rather than have the trackers along the top, they're now along the side, and the leisure space is now up in this corner. On this week, I was also going away, so I included a packing list. But otherwise, we have the events and the task list, and those checkboxes as per the last ones. For week 4, I wanted to expand on each of the spaces for the days of the week, so I had a little bit more space to write for each of them. So rather than having the big running task list on the left-hand page, that got moved to the right-hand page. We have the trackers down the side, the leisure section, each of the days of the week, and a note space, but we don't have the reflection space or a packing list. As is typical, towards the end of using the same style of weekly, week after week, I got a little bit demotivated here, and I also wrote myself a note of the fact that I was finding it difficult to keep up with my planners. This is something that was very apparent throughout this notebook, so you will see that some of the weeklies didn't really get used, even if they got set up. For this weekly, I continued with having the check boxes to check off when the weekly was finished with, but you can see that the overall layout had changed quite a bit. So we have space on the side here for each of the days of the week in terms of what's going on for events. And then on this side, we have an Alistair method task list, but I didn't really use it. At this time, I was trying to use a teacher planner along with my notebook, but when I pulled out all of my teaching stuff from this notebook, the only thing left over was chores, which was highly uninspiring, so I didn't really use my notebook as much as I could. For context, this was also the first bullet journal I had in 2020, and we know what happened then. For the next week, I needed another packing list, so we've got that in here. We have an event section and then a task list, but again, I didn't really utilize this very much, but I don't think that was the fault of the weekly. It was mainly because, as mentioned, all of my tasks for school, of which I had a lot of tasks, had been pulled out into a separate planner. Desperately trying to get back into my weeklies, I decided to set up a weekly with some stuff that I knew I loved, and that stuff being stars, except for this star, because he's a little further out than he's supposed to be. But at its core, this is effectively just that 8-box weekly, so splitting the page vertically and horizontally in half, so 4 boxes per page, one for each day of the week, and then a space over here for a sticker, which is a total lie, because I was not using my planner, so nothing was awesome. And a mini calendar. Similar layout again, but the mini calendar has now been changed to a note space that also didn't get used, and we've got the other 7 boxes for the days of the week. So hopefully you can see that this one and this one, they are effectively the same layout, they're just different in the sense of decoration and what I'm using that bonus space for, and also the positioning of the bonus space. Because I had been finding my weeklies hard to use, I decided to go from a full spread to a 1-page weekly. So we have 1 weekly here and 1 weekly here. So you can see on this one, we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and notes. And we have a similar thing on the other side, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but instead of notes, we have to-dos, and we don't have the mini calendar. Some of the boxes were filled in with decorative elements, some were filled in with, you know, the header for this being March weeklies. And while I used this one okay, I found this one harder to use. I do like the decoration though. I thought it was very pretty. I tried desperately going back to something that I know had worked previously and just did an Alistair method weekly, but that wasn't really cutting it. But then we got into April, and April was when we got into lockdown, which meant that I started doing a month of planning with me series where I did a video per day showing how I was using my journals. And that was hugely helpful for making sure that I was actually using my journal. But these aren't really what I would consider to be weeklies. They weren't pre-set up, they were more fill in as you go. So I'd write out the stuff from Monday, and then the next day I'd come in and do the Tuesday list, and then the next day I'd come in and do the Wednesday, so on and so forth. By this point though, I'd kind of gotten sick of doing the dailies, so for the next one, we have a weekly layout. Again, this one is based on the idea of halves and then thirds, so halves vertically for each page, and then thirds for the horizontal of each page. This space is kind of set aside by itself, kind of merged together to be the event space. These 2 boxes were merged together for a to-do, and then these 7 were the daily task lists. But you can see I was actually getting in and using my planner, and I think that by this point I'd kind of given up on the teacher planner, so I was bringing teaching related stuff back into my notebook, which also really helped. We can kind of see that a lot of my weeklies are based on dividing the page into halves, so 3 for task lists, and then this one for events. I really like the gradient going down the side here. I thought that was very pretty. This one was a little bit different. We have the task list and halves over here, but on this side we have 4 boxes in one column and then 3 in the other, and those 3 are offset so that we could have the remaining space for the header and a little quote. Obviously I was missing having something that was a little bit more cleanly structured with beautiful straight lines. So for this one, we have a box for each day of the week, and the weekend separated out here. We have a gratitude space, a water tracker, a large to-do list, a steps tracker, a little box to fill some space, a weather tracker, and a review of the day. Not that I necessarily filled in the review of the day, but I do like this layout. It's kind of loosely based on thirds, and by that I mean vertical thirds. So column 1, column 2, column 3. It's just that this part is merged together. Same idea, column 1, column 2, column 3. This is another loosely based on halves and thirds kind of layout. So half, 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 third, 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 third. Of course, when you get over to this kind of section, the thirds aren't perfectly lined up because of the spacing of the little May calendar, and then, you know, once I'd put that in, it's just the rest is a task list. Similar idea here with the Monday box being an actual third, and then the steps and header just taking up the rest of the space. It's kind of just a system of putting in the parts that you know you want to have equally spaced and kind of lined up. Not that this perfectly lines up because the doc grid didn't line up, and then putting in the other elements around that. This weekly layout was another halves and thirds type layout, so half, 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 third, third, third. So 6 boxes per page. It's just I merged these 2 together for a task list and merged these 3 together for a decorative panel. So we have Monday through Sunday and a task list, and then the decoration on the side. I feel like it's kind of obvious which weeks I was just not feeling it, because those are the weeks that I just default to doing the Alistair method for the whole week, rather than setting up any boxes. But both of these pages, we've got the Alistair method, Monday through Sunday, and then the task header to write in the list and check off when those things happened. This one was loosely based on thirds as well, and by that I mean vertical thirds, so third 1, third 2, and third 3. So the outer thirds, we've got an events list and decoration. Then for both of these sections, this third is for the Monday through Sunday, and the next third is for the task list. And then the same over here, but it didn't actually get used. Also, look at how shiny the gold paint is. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. If you think I struggled with my weeklies in this notebook, then you're gonna love this notebook, where I struggled so much more, to the point of actually just kind of scrapping weeklies altogether when I got to a certain point. I actually pulled out the weeklies and started doing them either in Notion or doing them in a spare LT 1917 that I had, which, considering how much I dislike the ghosting in there, you can see how fed up I must have been. Not so much with the journal itself, it's just that whatever I was doing wasn't working. I do have some weeklies in here though, so let's have a look. Part of the issue may have been that this was a Neapolitan notebook and I wasn't quite used to it, but this layout I quite like. So we've got decoration in the middle, which are just like, you know, stages of cell division, but they were decoration considering this was a science theme. We have a mini calendar and a top 3 task list. We have spaces for each of the days of the week and a note section. And then down the bottom here we have a meal plan for breakfast, lunch and dinner. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday through to Sunday, but separated into 3 columns for each of those meals. For the next weekly, the decoration I was using were little boxes made to represent elements of the periodic table, in particular those named after famous scientists. In amongst all of these though, we had a packing list, we had the days of the week scattered in there, a notes section, a mini calendar, and my top 3. This one was loosely based on the idea of thirds going down and thirds going across, but very loosely because each of these thirds are differently sized. The next weekly was more based on the thirds idea, both vertically and horizontally. And in this one it seems I was trying to fit in quite a few days, so we start on the 24th and we go through to the 2nd, thus the very large mini calendar which has 2 months in there. These 2 columns out of 3 are just taken up for notes and tasks. We've also got a priorities list, but the rest of it is those days of the very long week. Those 3 weeklies are actually the only weeklies I have in this notebook, but we do have a full flip through of this notebook and pretty much all of my other previously filled ones on the channel. That playlist is also linked in the description box. While this journal left me feeling a bit defeated in terms of my weekly setups, my next journal started in January of a new year. New year, new me, new weeklies. For this one I also didn't have the burden of going with a Neapolitan, so back to my personal preference, which is white dot grid paper. For each of my weeklies in January though, I had used the same layout, so we're not going to look through every single one of them in huge amount of detail because they are the same as each other, but each of them has this side separated into 2 columns, not perfect halves, but 2 columns. One of them is for the events, and then the other one includes top tasks for the week, action steps, or things that I wanted to do to complete my goals, 101 things, or things on my 101 things list that I wanted to do that week, my meal plan for dinners, and my reflection, which had 3 positives, 3 things to do better next week, and 3 challenges. This side though was the Alistair method and has the task list for the week, so just all of my tasks and noting which ones I got done and when I got them done. As per last journal, like 2 journals ago, I also put that little tick box at the top to indicate when I had or hadn't finished dealing with this weekly. When it came to February, I was sick of using the same layout for every single week, but I wanted something to tie them together, so I decided to do Dutch door weeklies for every single week. These all had the same kind of elements on them, just in different arrangements. So each of them had some kind of a meal plan, I'm pretty sure. Each of them had a space for my habits that I was tracking, action steps, 101 things, task lists. So this one we have Monday through Friday on this side. You can see I've cut away a third of the page so I could still see the habit tracker on the side panel here. And on the other side, we have a to-do list for the week. We have the reflection space and the lists for Saturday and Sunday. Our next Dutch Door Weekly had the top section of the middle page cut away. So we can see this is our Dutch Door. We had the reflection, didn't use it, but I had it. Action steps and 101 things were up the top here. The habit tracker, the large to-do list for the week was up here, so I could see it regardless of which way the Dutch door was open/closed. Each of the days of the week on the Dutch door, and then the meal plan over the side here. You can also see that we have some space taken up by decoration, because I was trying to be a little bit more decorative, especially because my weeklies from January had been so not decorative. The next Dutch door we were doing, we had one taped to the middle of the page here. This was done with a tip-in. I have a separate video on tip-ins that explains how you can do them and how you can use them. Worth checking out. We have the habit tracker, action steps, 101 things, all the events for the week, all of my meals, and I guess this must have been a water tracker for the week. Things to pack, because EOT seat week was either here or coming. I'm pretty sure it was here. Tasks for the week in the Alistair method, and my reflection. Given the fact that I got sunburnt, yeah, certainly went on camp. Our next Dutch door is another vertical style, so cutting away half of that center page, And on this center section, we've got each of the days of the week and also a tasks and notes space. I separated my water intake into a little tracker of its own. We've also got my habit tracker. And then down the side here on this right-hand page, we have the action steps, 101 things and reflection, and also a little list of things to watch out for that were coming up in March. While I had super loved having different styles of weeklies for the entire February, in March, I'm very much back into the swing of term 1 at school, so doing different things for each week would have been a little bit much. So each of these ones had a very similar style. An events panel down the side of the first half of the first page. The middle 2 halves of each of these 2 pages had my daily log. And then the side part here, on this one had a to-do list, whereas on the next one we had a to-do list and a meal plan. So same stuff over here, just the addition of the meal plan in that top corner. I kept this layout the same for the next week, just made it a simple outline rather than that kind of rope style border. So it makes the layouts look a little bit different, but the style in general is fairly similar. You can see on this one, I was also keeping these as daily logs, so just putting in the next header once I'd finished the list for the day, whereas this one I went and put in ahead of time. Come April, I was missing having different things for each of the weeks. You can see I kind of flip-flop between liking the consistency of just knowing what I'm setting up, so doing the same thing over and over, versus liking the newness of doing different things and then changing it up all the time. This was a change it up kind of month though, so this one we had a little bit more decoration than I would previously have done, or usually do. And this one's kind of hard to explain in terms of the layout, outside of the fact that we're working with halves again. So 2 halves per page, then putting the boxes in. Each of these were just squares based on how wide they could be, so 6 centimeters across and 6 centimeters tall. And because they were on craft paper, I just stick them in where they would fit. For our next one, I liked the idea of the little square boxes, but I didn't want to play with more craft paper on this one. So we have a halves and then thirds kind of method, giving us 6 boxes per page, or 12 total. So 7 of those taken up for the days of the week, 1 for notes, 1 for a quote, 1 for some decoration, and the remaining 2 combined into a to-do list. I quite like this weekly. I think it looks quite good. For this one, we're going loosely with a halves and thirds method. I say loosely because over here it gets a little bit skew-whiff because we're dealing with some decoration and a notes section and whatever else. I think this was just a very specific size piece of paper that I actually had available, and that's why this doesn't go all the way to where the Friday header is, but it's all good. It was enjoyable getting to play with the craft paper in this setup. Back to 1-page weeklies though, because this was the holiday break, so I didn't have a lot that I needed to write down. And this was another one where I wanted to do that kind of mirroring effect. So we have the middle third on each page for the trackers, and then the outer 2/3 for events and to-dos. When it came to May, we had another month where I did Dutch doors for all of the weeklies, but I do consider these weeklies rather than dailies because they are all sectioned out, like pre-sectioned out, with spaces for each of the days. And we have a week per view. So Monday through Sunday and notes, and the same again, Monday through Sunday and notes, and the same again. I'm not gonna say that again, you kind of get what I mean. On the back of this one, I also had a reflection for my bullet journal, and I had a to-do list for the month down this side panel too, and some decoration. Now, considering that these were May weeklies, you would expect that the next month would be June, and you would be right, but I wrote July on every single one of these weeklies, which is why I didn't use them, along with a whole bunch of things about this setup that didn't really work for me, but it's cool. We learnt some stuff. For each of these though, I did do Dutch doors because we were getting up to mid-year and I kind of wanted to use up the space in my journal so that I could start a new journal in July, even though I wrote July on all of these weeklies. So each of these ones are Dutch doors and they all have a decorative panel down the side. The stuff in the middle though does change a little bit. So on this one, we had my running task list for the week and my top 3 tasks, along with a mini calendar and an incorrect header. This side of the Dutch door had events, whereas on the other side we had a meal log, both just broken down with the same amount of spacing for each day of the week. On this one, we also had a schoolwork list that just had Monday through to Friday because I was trying not to do schoolwork on the weekend. I don't know how successful that was. For the next weekly, again have the decorative panel. We have a space for the events on the very left side here, just under the mini calendar. And then this side of the Dutch door has 3 days of the week, another 3 days of the week, and then we flip over to get Sunday and the task list for the week as a whole. On the very right hand side here, this is where I had the meal log. So you can see we have the same sections, they're just in different spaces. And that makes the weekly setup a little different. The idea is that by moving things around, it feels fresh, it still feels new in my mind, and I would use it, but as said, a whole bunch of factors meant that I did not use these ones. For this one, I set it up so that we have my school timetable and then a little list, or space to do a list for each day of the week. And then on the other side of the Dutch door, we had Saturday and Sunday, a running to-do list space, and a meal log. I didn't have to have a separate events section here because I had enough space for each days of the week that I could actually list out what those events were, even if it didn't end up getting used. Again, decorative panel on the side, and a similar idea for the next week with the decorative panel, and then each of the days of the week, which had the meal log with each of those days, so I didn't have to have it separate. A space to record things that were coming up next month, and the running to-do list along the side here. A little bit of a disappointing way to end the weekly logs in a journal that had otherwise seen quite a lot of success with the weeklies, at least compared to the journal that came before it by a long shot. But it's okay, I did not let that deter me when I got into my next journal, which has honestly been one of my favorite journals that I've ever used, even though it has not been treated well and is kind of fraying at the edges, but let's have a look at some more weeklies. Now, before we have a panic that I wrote June on my July weeklies, this one was actually in June, so it's all good. But for this one, we had a priorities list on the side, broken down into different kind of life areas. So content creating, stuff for school, personal tasks, home, and other things. We had an event space with a little list for each of the days of the week. No dividing lines, but because I'd used green headers, it stuck out enough for me. A space for my meals for the week with the same kind of spacing as the events list, and a to-do list with the Alistair method again. You can see that my theme for July was books, so we have little book decorations with that nice shiny gold paint that I love so much. Now with a July header for the first official week of July, you can see on this one we have the meals down the side. We have the priorities again with just 4 categories, so no other section. And then the remaining space was taken up with daily checklists. Again, cute little book decoration. Our next July weekly has spaces for each of the days of the week on the side panels here. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday goes across, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then in the middle we have events and we have meals. Again with the same spacing, so just like 4 lines per day of the week. This one was a little bit interesting because it's actually 2 weeks, but it's not like weekly 1 and weekly 2. Instead, what we have is space for Monday through Sunday of the first week, and then a space of Monday through Sunday for the second. This side has our to-do lists, but they're kind of like the priorities list in that they're sectioned into different areas. And we again have some book decoration. This weekly is a bit more back to something that's kind of comfortable for me, which is the idea of separating the space into halves, thirds, whatnot. So we've got halves for each page vertically and thirds for each page horizontally. So 6 spaces per page, 12 total. We have 4 dedicated to book decoration, 1 dedicated to the mini calendar and the shiny header, and then the rest dedicated to each of the days of the week. For this month, I decided to do another full month of Dutch Door weeklies, where we have 1 week per Dutch Door view, but we decided to change the layout of each of these. So we've got decoration on the back here, we have a task list and a mini calendar on this left-hand panel. For our first weekly, we have the events on the left here and an Alistair style task list on the right. For the second weekly, I divided each side of the spread into 4, just vertically divided and horizontally divided in half. So Monday through Sunday and notes or tasks. But this was closing week, we were busy, so didn't write a lot. For the next one, we had the left-hand side divided in half and then into quarters. So I had 8 spaces. And the other side was a task list, again done in the Alistair style method. This next layout was a little bit different to anything that I think I've done before, in that we had a box for each day of the week, but they weren't all together. They were sectioned out over 2 separate parts of the page, and then in between them we had those task lists. Although these didn't get used as much as I probably would have liked them to, I am very aware that we were very busy at this point in time because we were moving house in the middle of a lockdown. So, you know, trying to organize that, and then also trying to organize teaching online and yeah, it was a little bit messy. Now my September weeklies were a little bit special for a couple of reasons. One was because I again decided to do Dutch doors for each of them, but two was that I did the Dutch door differently to how I've ever done it before. So having a look at the elements, on each week we have spaces for each of the days of the week in terms of events, with the weekend shared on the side here. We had a meals section at the top, so you could see that regardless of which Dutch door you're on, and my priorities for the month. What we also had were checklists down the bottom for my content creating, school tasks, home tasks, and personal tasks. But the really special thing were these task lists on the side. So we had a general to-do list for each week, so tasks that I'd need to do every single week, there being the same tasks every single week, and same idea with my reset checklists. So the same tasks each week, so that I didn't have to write this task list and this task list out again and again each week with the same tasks. You can see that my Dutch doors were a little bit special in that they had this space cut out of them. So I could flip it over and I have space to check off that to-do list and space to check off that reset list without having to write those out again. This was quite an interesting little experiment. I quite liked how it turned out, even though I didn't actually end up using it as much as I had hoped to, and that's because this month I also found a new style of doing, well, kind of weeklies, but kind of dailies. And really, it's not all that new from what I was already doing with the Alistair method. It's just that you were highlighting each of the days of the week, and rather than having like 1 week per view, once you got to the end of the week, you just started the next week. I really liked doing this, and I ended up doing it for the rest of this journal. While you were, in theory, supposed to put these little lines across to say like, hey, this X belongs to this task, I got kind of fed up with doing that pretty quickly because I wanted the lines to be straight, but I couldn't be bothered ruling them. It took way too much time. I was already spending a lot of time making sure that the vertical columns were nice and straight using my washi tape masking trick, so having to do the lines across, you can see I just fell away with doing that. But the way you separated each of the weekly layouts was just by putting this horizontal line and putting out the initials for the days of the week again, along with a little header that said which week you were focusing on. I really liked this style of layout, so I did end up using it for the rest of this journal. So we have my stuff for September in my September color palette. I did it again in October with my October color palette. I had it in November with my November color palette. There you see I stopped doing the highlighted lines and just did a ruled line of color because it was a little bit faster. And I also tried to use it in December, but I was quite busy and I didn't like the fact that the lines weren't all the same color, so you couldn't really easily see what lined up with what. I was kind of trying to do a candy canes thing because I was doing a candy cane striped border on my other trackers. I didn't really use my journal in December, but I still like this style of layout. It was really cool to use. I know, technically not a weekly, but I thought it deserved an honorable mention and kind of helped to justify why those September weeklies didn't get utilized as much as I otherwise thought they were going to. As you saw though, this journal finished in December, which means it's time to move on to a January journal with a new boost of motivation to do more weeklies. And that journal was this one, which is another Archer and Olive. After kind of 3.5 months of having done that one style of weekly log, or kind of daily logs, I really wanted to get back to something with a different structure. So for this one, we had a habit tracker. Started doing my habit trackers more so on my weeklies rather than as a monthly collection. We had my 101 things, notes, a 2 lines a day space to kind of recap what happened, weekly projects, and then this place was for my daily logging. So I do Mondays and then cap it out with Tuesday's header, do my Tuesday list, cap it out with Wednesday's header, so on and so forth. And on the other side here, I did just have a general space for tasks and to-dos. Cute little Dutch door, just cut off the very edge of the page, put in a little tab and had some decoration. On to the next weekly, I had a similar kind of style thing with the daily logging spaces. So the real weekly setup is just this part here, where I had the habit tracker, the 101 things, and a weekly project space, or kind of like a priorities space. Everything else at the start of the week, outside of maybe the Monday header, had been left open. I quite liked having the weekly projects list, so I kept that for the next weekly, as well as the habit tracker and a weekly to-do list. The 101 things list I decided to make a lot smaller because I hadn't been using the full section, so just one line here. And I did section out each of my daily checklists ahead of time as part of my weekly setup. So kind of another layout that's loosely based on halves and thirds. This layout was much the same with the halves and thirds, so habit tracker, like projects or kind of like, weekly tasks, and then space for each day of the week, and a large running to-do list which didn't get utilized, but that's because I'm pretty sure that this week we were going to a wedding, so I wasn't really around to write a lot down. That's the thing, a lot of the time when I get busy, I don't use my journal so much, whether that be because I'm busy with stressful work or busy with exciting things like going out and seeing people. Now I will say some of the weeklies in this month I liked and some of them I really didn't. Mainly, usually, because they didn't quite fit with my monthly theme. This was one of them. All in all, it's not a bad weekly, like it's got the habits, the notes, and then Alistair method kind of task list, but it didn't at all match my monthly theme, yeah? There is no correlation here. And I think that's probably because I ended up setting it up at school, because I hadn't set it up ahead of time, which means I didn't have any of my supplies. So, yeah, a little bit unfortunate, could have been a lot better. It's not necessarily a bad layout, it just didn't really work as well as I would have liked because I didn't like it as much as I would have liked. The next weekly very much more fit the actual theme that I was going for with the month, so we have the same coloration, and this is a recreation of one of the layouts that we've already looked at, the Dutch door layout from the yellow February. So Monday through Friday, habits down the side. On the other side we have the to-do list for the week, which didn't really get used, and Saturday and Sunday. I did like this one a lot more though, because it did match the rest of the aesthetic for the month. While this one had the same color palette, I did not like this one because colors are not the only thing that go into making something match, right? We don't have any of those kind of like lines or layers of color, no gradient work in that way. Like we have a slight gradient with the headers here, but even the headers don't match what I was doing on the monthly pages. So didn't like that so much. Tried to remedy it by putting in this panel of color, but you couldn't see it from this side. If it wasn't already very obvious though, this is another one of those folded Dutch doors that's very similar to the ones that I used to use in the way back whens. For this one, we were kind of getting better, I guess, kinda. We had the little pieces of decoration that were similar to the monthly setup, but this lettering style didn't match, so it still bothered me. You see, I'm very easily bothered by these kind of things. But in terms of the structure of the layout, we have some decoration space, so quote and decoration, the Alistair method going on both of these pages, and then the middle section we have events, and we have habits and notes. Into some weeklies that I super loved though, because they did match the overall, again, aesthetic of the month. So same colors, same style of lettering, same style of decorations, my happy place. We have the habit tracker and the projects list, the events for the week, and then the Alistair style running task list on the Dutch door. I probably didn't need a Dutch door on this one, really, because I didn't use this side, so I probably could have done it slightly differently so I didn't take up as much space, but I still liked it. I still think it worked well. I mean, technically I still ended up using 1, 2, 3 sides out of 4, so I don't think of it as wasted space. Maybe I could have used this side for more of a brain dump before I moved into the next week or something similar, but I do like the decoration down the side. It is very cute. I used effectively the same thing for the next week, just changing up which colors I was focusing on. So projects, habits, events, tasks. This one, again, I didn't utilize the back side either, but I did use the majority of this one, so it's all good. I was very much into keeping things the same for this month because I was kind of on a track with something that was working. I didn't end up putting the decorative panel in, sadly, but we have the same sections again. This one, though, I very much feel like I did not need this part at all. These little tasks could have just gone in the project section, or I could have put some tasks on the daily kind of section. So you could kind of consider this to be a waste I guess. This comes back to the idea that using the same thing over and over usually doesn't work for me because I get bored, and I like to be able to pick and choose my layouts for each week depending on how busy I'm going to be in that week. With that said though, I still kept it the same for the next week anyways, but I did actually use all of the space available to me, even if I didn't put in the decorative panel. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they work really well. While March was effectively the same weekly every week, just with a change up of the colours, April was another one of those months where I used the same elements and then just moved stuff around. So this side of the layout stayed very much the same every week. So space for each day of the week, put in my meal plan, we have the tasks, and then we have daily boxes for each of the kind of day specific things, like stuff that I know needs to go on a specific day, whether that be tasks or events. This is the side that changed up though, and mainly it just changed up in terms of where these little grid spaces were placed. So you can see we have thirds going down, thirds going across, so we have 9 spaces, 7 of which are for the days of the week, and 2 which are for those decorative grid boxes. So we had the 2 corners here for this one. We had 1 corner and 1 middle section for this layout. This one had the top and the bottom corner again. This one had a middle and this bottom corner, and then this one had a top and a bottom corner, but on opposite sides to previously. You can see though, all of them look very much the same, know what to expect, easy to set up all at once, that kind of thing. And I think during this month I was quite busy because it was like the end of the term, and then I was going away to Melbourne to see my family. So I wasn't necessarily opposed to having something familiar for each week, and I did use it to varied extent, really depending on the day. I liked the layout, I would use it again, but I do know in my soul I don't like doing the same thing over and over and over. By this point we're into my 11th bullet journal, this guy here, and I was kind of looking to try something a bit new and go with a different size. Up until this point, all of my notebooks have been A5, even though the dingbats had a slightly different size compared to the other ones. But the notebook I decided to go with after this one was a B5. The B5 has way more space, so the layouts that we can do in here are certainly different. Of course, some of them I did just approach of, hey, let's do the same thing that we do in an A5 but make it bigger, but you can also get like way more sections and thus way more detail. You can put more trackers, all of that kind of thing. But let's have a look at the weeklies that I set up in this B5. I guess you could say I did utilize the space well in that I included a very large habit tracker of a lot of habits. But on our first weekly for the B5, we have a space for my priorities for the week. Very large list of priorities to only list out 3 of them, but it's fine. A space for my events for the week and also my dinner plan, which is what MP means, meal plan. And then the rest of the space here was dedicated to my task list as done in the Alistair method again. One of the ways that I dealt with having as much space as I did on these weeklies was putting a border on every single page to just make it slightly less. But on this one, we again have that big habit tracker. We have the task list section, which is the bottom of this page, and then this space over here. A space for each of the days of the week, which have BLD for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then a smaller priorities list, which ended up getting used much better. Maybe having it in a littler corner made it less daunting. When it came to the next weekly, I was feeling adventurous. I wanted to do a Dutch door in my B5. So again, we've got priorities and we've got the events. I section off the meal plan to have it over here, and I still have my habit tracker. And then the rest of the space was for our tasks. And weirdly, I had like tasks not here, but I did have tasks here. Then heaps of tasks there. I think this was probably part of a brain dump that I was doing, so they weren't necessarily tasks that I had intended on getting done this week, but they were ones that I mused or thought of in this week. It is very satisfying to see that much written down though, especially on a weekly spread in a B5 with a Dutch door. Didn't utilize my habit tracker as well as I could, but that's okay. For the next week I did a similar thing, but we went with not Alistair method, just writing out my task list. We have the events in the bottom corner here, the habit tracker, which again I didn't check off as well as I could, my meal plan, and on the other side of the Dutch door we had plenty of space for more tasks, but I sadly didn't utilize it as well as I had the last week. Like we said, they're not always going to work for every single week. and that's okay. This weekly probably makes me the saddest because I was really excited to do a journaling challenge that I put out. So each of the spaces along here was to do that journaling and like, you know, respond to the prompt, but I got the flu, so it didn't actually happen. This space was for a brain dump, which I did use a bit of. This space was for my habits, but because I had been sick, the habit was like, don't die, which thankfully I was able to complete. Similar idea with the projects list, was just, you know, get better, don't give in to the sickness. And up the top here, we just had a space for each of my meals and the events that were going on, which was, again, just get over the flu. For this weekly, we decided to go with something super basic, so one that we have seen before, just dividing each of the pages in half and half again. So 4 spaces per, 8 for the whole spread. One of them was dedicated to the habits list and the others were dedicated to my daily task lists and events lists. And we also had a little space at the bottom for a meal plan, or meal log. For the next weekly, I wanted to bring back a Dutch door, but this time it was a folded Dutch door rather than cutting the page away. On this one though, we have the habit tracker and the priorities list. We also have a meal plan and an events section, all tucked into this page here. This page and the back side of the folded Dutch door are for my task list, just a running list, not dedicated to specific days or anything like that. And then I had a meal log. So the meal plan was there to say what I was supposed to be eating or what I had planned to eat, but I also wanted to record what I was actually eating and whether it had fruit or vegetables, whether it was something I had planned. I can't remember what this little cross meant. I think it might have been for no added sugar. I can't remember. For this one, we're going with a Dutch door again, but not a folded, instead a cut. And we have the habit tracker still, the meal plan, but in terms of the meal log, which I put here, I expanded this to include all of the meals that I could possibly have in a day, or at least what I consider to be all the possible ones. Like second breakfast isn't in here, sorry hobbits, but we have breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack. Obviously some of them I don't eat or didn't eat, but some of them I did. And again, I was recording whether it had fruit, veg, whether it was planned, I believe, and whether it didn't have something. Not that I remember what the something was. Events, projects, back of the to-do list, which I did utilize a good amount of space on. And I like the fact that I cut the Dutch door so I could always see the events. I could have cut it maybe a little bit smaller so it didn't encroach on the event space quite as much, but you can still see it. I was obviously really on a Dutch door kick again and writing down lots of stuff. Like, oh, it's actually just so satisfying to me how full this is. This makes my heart happy. I really love full weeklies. This one was a folded Dutch door though, so folding this middle section so I could see my meal plan and the log. I went back to just recording the meals that I was having rather than listing them all out. And we have the events section over here, the habit section, and this folded Dutch door I used a good chunk of. I'm not sure if it's like subconsciously I wanted to use more Dutch doors in this journal because I wanted to get through it quicker. The B5, like, although it was an exciting challenge because it was very much not my typical, it felt quite overwhelming in terms of how much space there was. And I know for a lot of people, extra space means, oop, you can do more decoration, which I didn't find that that was my tendency in this. I had just a tendency to write more down to fill space rather than do bigger pieces of decoration to fill the space. But in this one, I had my meal/food log. We had a space for my timetable for the week, priorities, daily checklists, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on the back side of the Dutch door we had the other 4 days. We have the habits and the tasks. So loosely this one was split in halves, both vertically and horizontally. You can see we filled in those spaces as such, with a little bit of fudging over here so that I could fit in that timetable. For this one we have the return of the Alistair method with the highlighted every second column business going on. That style that I used for like 4 months in a row. And we also have the return of the tick box, which is nice too. Though I feel like I might have just put this here for a video. Who knows, considering that one's ticked off and that one isn't. We've got the habit tracker though, the priorities list, the events list, my tasks on the Dutch door, both sides of, and the meal log, notes, and shopping list. Those shopping lists I now like to include as a sticky note in the front of my journal rather than writing it on my weekly, just so that then I can just like replace the sticky note or take the sticky note with me to the shops, that kind of thing. I had obviously enjoyed that style of task list again, so I bought it back for this week. So we have 1 column, 2 column, 3 column for that. On the other side, we have the habit tracker, the meal log, got the events space on the side here, the shopping list is still here, and the priorities list in green. Again, a nice use of Dutch doors. And for the next week, because I was in the middle of reading the bullet journal method, I actually went to daily logging instead of continuing with weekly logs. This was also something that I continued into August, and I absolutely loved it. Look at how full it is. It's the thing, like, you don't have any wasted space because you just start your next daily log after the last daily log. And it was very satisfying to like go through, make sure everything had either been migrated or checked off or whatever else, and put the little tick in the box to say that the page had been dealt with. And I know this isn't a weekly log, and I know we're here for weekly log inspiration, but I really liked this. August was my last month in the B5 though, and then I decided to take it to the extreme and go from a very large journal to a much smaller one. I needed to put them together so that you could kind of see the size comparison. So this is the B5, whereas this is the B6. And it always annoys me that the number is higher, but the journal is smaller. But it's fine, it's okay. This is the next one. Let's have a look. In this journal, there was less space in terms of each page or spread, and in terms of the journal as a whole. So starting in September, this was the first iteration of the weekly that I had, while this side was for daily logging, and that also went over onto the back as well. You can see I changed the style, more on that in a second. The real kind of weekly log space, or the part that I would consider to be the weekly log setup, was this part here. So we had a section for my events, a section for my breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so meal planning, little priorities list, and a habit tracker. And this kind of style stayed the same for both September and October because it was working really well. This side, on the other hand, I had initially started with 2 columns for my daily logging, but I quickly found that that didn't really work, so I instead decided to go to the Alistair method because it was just going to fit more in, or it was going to fit it more comfortably, effectively. For each of the weeklies, because they spanned 2 spreads, and I typically didn't have quite enough to completely fill this back page with tasks as well, I dedicated this space to a weekly reflection. So just recording my wins from the week, any challenges, and things that I wanted to improve. And I actually really enjoyed doing weekly reflections. I found them quite helpful at the time. The next week was much the same. I did a little trimming and made a Dutch door with a little tab, but this left-hand page, essentially identical. And then we had the Alistair method for the task list and the weekly reflection. And I also included a planning review section to record stuff that wasn't quite working and things that I wanted to try to fix that. You can see that the weeklies themselves didn't have very much / any decoration outside of the color palette, but I did really love this size of notebook for doing decoration on my monthly pages. Those ones I found very fun to decorate because the size was a little less daunting, so I didn't have to do as much decoration. Continuing with the weeklies though, same style, didn't have the Dutch door on this one, but still went over to the other side and had my reflection in the bag. And then the same again. Of course, if I use the same thing repeatedly too many times, I do start to get a little bit lazy with it, don't really fill it in, you know, a little demotivated because it is more of the same. But despite that, I continued to stick with it. I mean, this is also probably in part, you know, end of month kind of fatigue with my theme and using the same stuff, and end of just like a busy period, and my family was over at this point, so I wasn't really using my planner as much. Like, many things go into this. I at least recorded a win, you know, I finished my last A&O blog post. When it came to October though, I pretty much kept it exactly the same, so we'll go through these ones fairly quickly. Same layout, same reflection, same layout, and same reflection space probably, yep. And same layout and same reflection space, though I didn't actually fill this one in. Had a packing list here because I was going away, and same layout though didn't fill a lot of it in, and same reflection with a post-it note just randomly. I didn't actually end up having enough space in this notebook to do November, so we have no November weekly spreads or spreads in general, but we do have December. And so for December, I was doing kind of weekly logs in the sense of the fact that like I had them pre-sectioned out for each day of the month, but again, they're kind of more like dailies, I suppose. So 4 per page with little doors, which is quite cute. Though it does make the page a little hard to handle because sometimes the doors get caught, but they're still quite sweet. So not really a weekly log, but it's still cute, so I wanted to show you. While the B6 was a fun experiment, I was very much missing the size of my A5, so for the new year, I of course had to move back into one, and we went again with an Archer and Olive. I love this notebook, it's super pretty. Look at it, so shiny. Anywho, let's look at some weeklies. Now I do say weeklies, but a good chunk of this journal has been daily logging. So for January, I did dailies, just one after the other, no pre-sectioned out where they were gonna be, and honestly, still loving it. Really do like the way it looks. I like being able to just use up the amount of space that I need. Don't so much like that I can't schedule events ahead of time, but I effectively just end up adding them to my daily log and then pulling them forward when I need them. I did a similar thing in February, though I didn't necessarily like working on the brown paper as much as I had liked working on the white paper. Also, February was just hectic as heck, and as we've previously talked about, when I get really busy, I don't use my journal as much. We could almost say that these were like weeklies because I did pre-section out from effectively I think the 9th onwards, because I hadn't done it before the 9th. So I'd said like, oh yep, this is for the 9th, this is for the 10th, this is for the 12th. I hadn't done the 11th because I was away. The 13th, this is the 14th, 15th, etc. You can see I didn't really use it as much as I had hoped because, again, busy, journal neglect. It happens every single time for me. In terms of what I would consider typical weeklies, we don't really see that until we get into March, and even then it was more so just 8 sections per spread, and I just followed the days through. So this one goes from Wednesday the 1st to Wednesday the 8th. I was away on a trip, so I didn't fill any of this in. Similar idea with this one, Thursday the 9th to Thursday the 16th, 8 spaces, 1 for each of those days. Didn't fill it in because I was away. You can see all of these again though were done on Dutch doors, so we have the decorative panels on the side that I only had to do once. On to the next weekly. For this one, I changed it up and went vertical rather than horizontal because on these ones I was going to be back at home and wanting to write down task lists. And on some of these days I did write quite a bit, and on some of them I was sick and wrote barely anything. Sometimes we can't, predict how much use we're going to get out of them, just because we can't necessarily predict if we're going to be well enough to use them. On this page of 8 though, because there is no 32nd day in March, I didn't want to put the 1st of April because I wanted that to be in April, so I instead just had a next month section, but I was still unwell, so I didn't actually use it. All of these ones though, the vertical ones, are based on the idea of thirds and halves. It's just that that outer third has been taken away by the Dutch door. In April, I've again gone back to the daily logging because I've just been enjoying it so much, and I really like the way it looks, and I like writing this much stuff down. Again, it doesn't really offer an easy way to do forward planning in terms of tasks, but I'm kind of okay with that. It's been working for me at the moment. And then we're into May, and the question is, will I be doing dailies or will I be doing weeklies? At this point, I haven't decided, so, blank canvas to work with, I suppose. I would love to know, is your preference weeklies or dailies? I'm gonna hazard a guess and say that it's either weeklies or both, just given the fact that you've watched to the end of this very long video. If you wanted to see more super long bullet journal videos, I've got plenty. They're in a playlist at the top here for you. Or if you wanted more weekly spread inspiration, the one at the bottom is where it's at. Click or tap on either of those and I'll see you over there.